Vincent and I have been best friends since we were kids. In person, we were a couple who licked each other's entire bodies. We agreed to get married when one of us became an alpha and the other an omega. In the end, we both differentiated into S-class alpha. The word breakup was never uttered by anyone. It's just that he didn't get up and get dressed and lean over to kiss me on the forehead. I didn't tug on his sleeve to keep him from leaving. The end was sealed in silence. My friends think that we have a problem with the two of us. The two of us have been saving up for 3 days to pull together, trying to get us to talk it out. After all, from a young bare ass growing up, no one wants to see us break up. Spencer and Evan meant well, but they didn't know that we weren't buddies, we were broken up. We were sitting diagonally across from each other in the booth, the farthest distance. In the old days, people were always right next to each other, and they wouldn't have felt close enough. Vincent's eyes look more calm under the red lights. He looked toward me into my eyes, and a throbbing welled up inside, as if the pain of the breakup was still fresh. I began to feel impatient. I didn't want to see him. The wound wouldn't scab over if I tore it open repeatedly. I purposely put my glass down loudly and looked over at him. He and I were always so in tune with each other, understanding each other in just one glance. He took the initiative and opened his mouth with a hint of anger. "What's with the attitude?" I lifted a bottle of wine and slammed it on the floor. "That's my attitude, I can't fucking look at you." The fire between the two was instant. I rushed over in 3 steps and yanked him by the collar. I punched him in the face, which was surprisingly handsome. He didn't show any weakness, and we didn't use pheromones, we went straight for the jugular. Spencer and Evan froze for a moment, and Evan yelled, "Separate them." The crowd of people pulled the two of us, who had been fighting so hard, apart. I gritted my teeth and said fiercely, "Vincent, I'm done with you, you'd better stay away from my place." He looked at me with a deep voice. "This sentence is also for you." We both conveyed the same meaning in the simplest and most direct way. Don't be a peacemaker between us, we've really broken up. A farce broke up. I walked to the underground garage. Vincent was leaning against the side of the car waiting for me, tall and leggy, his head hanging slightly, his inky black hair covering his equally dark pupils, unable to see his emotions. Seeing me come over, he reached out and threw an ice pack to me. I raised my hand and took it. Applying it to my face, the ice made me grimace. Vincent's eyes flashed with a hint of a smile. "Don't know how to be gentle." I grumbled. "Russell's a good boy, he wouldn't believe me if I went easy on him." I took one look at his equally bruised face and poofed. I waved my hand at him. "Okay, let's go." He watched me quietly as I opened the door and got in the car, only saying, "Uh-huh." I thought for a moment and rolled down the window. I don't think anyone will ever let us meet in a private setting like this again. Uh-huh. I was a little irritated at the way he was shying away from words. I wanted to be angry, but in what position? There was a time when I could get mad at him for not getting enough coke, or for dying in a game, or for having a nightmare. So justified so at will. The face of Vincent is always with a helpless smile. Those good times were so stark that they hadn't faded one iota. I fought back the huge ache in my chest to look at Vincent. He was looking at me with his eyes downcast, and his thoughts were so tangible that they would condense into a mist in the pupils of his eyes. I inexplicably wanted to cry a little. I hurriedly rolled up the window, not forgetting to throw the ice pack he gave me at the last minute. His eyelashes fluttered slightly, and the corners of his mouth hooked into a bitter smile, saying I was childish. But his figure in the rearview mirror didn't move a muscle, looking in the direction I left, looking so depressed and lonely. I retracted my gaze, suddenly wanting to go back. Those hands I once clasped with all my fingers. Those lips I had kissed madly and passionately. I had that person in one piece. Why couldn't we be together now? We were clearly supposed to be holding hands and going home, discussing the company under the covers being annoying. Discussing where we're going to spend our only free time on New Year's Eve. But then a voice in the back of my mind tells me that it's not okay anymore. I can't be capricious anymore. In fact, from very early on, I felt that we may all be divided into S-class alpha. We are destined to become the most literal successor in the family. and marry another S-class Omega who is a good match for the family. To give birth to the next, strong and perfect heir to the family. When they were young, they made a promise that whoever became an Omega would marry the other. It was just a wild and charming dream. When the dream wakes up, those sweetness and happiness need to be repaid with 10 times more pain and reluctance. 3. We won't meet on private occasions. But the elders obviously don't know our bent. The two families have always been close friends and will still cross paths. My parents and I went to the banquet together. There were not only Vincent's family, but Wesley's as well, and I saw two people sitting together when I entered. One figure I knew well, Vincent. The other figure, Wesley. My eyes flicked to the pheromone sticker on the back of his neck. An S-class Omega, he's only abroad all the time, otherwise he would have been one of the people we grew up with. The atmosphere was good, with the elders chatting about the recent stock market and bank policies. Wesley's father smiled and said, "Wesley is 2 years younger than Vincent, so he should be called his brother and get along with him. It's also the right age." Wesley raised his head, his lips red and teeth white, beautiful and vivid, inclined his head to Vincent and called out, "Vincent." "Aha. I don't know where to go now that I'm back in China. Can Vincent take me out when he's free?" "Sure." Vincent's family and Wesley's family looked at each other and laughed. It's just a blind date in disguise. They were afraid it would be too obvious, so they invited our family to accompany them. People of their status never eat any meaningless meal or say any meaningless words. The chopsticks in my hand made a slight clatter on the bone saucer. I raised my eyes and saw Vincent's gaze. My heart is a little hard to bear, like blocking something that I can't see and can't tell. I pursed my lips and said, "Go to the restroom." Mother nodded to me. Before closing the door of the box, I heard Auntie Chu's voice. "The two children look like a good match. They look good together." "Why do they look good together? Just because one is an alpha and the other is an omega." I rinsed my face with cool water in the sink. I tried to suppress my emotions. There's nothing to feel bad about, it's only a matter of time, whether it's him or me. I settled down, and when I looked back up again, Vincent was leaning against the wall behind me. A cigarette was lit in his hand, and he dipped his head to take a drag, handing it to me. I took a drag on his hand, changing brands, incense-flavored cigarettes, the same flavor as my pheromones. In the smoke, he was slightly stunned. His fingertips grazed my face. "Are you crying?" I wiped my face, just washed my face. Then he said in a pretense of a relaxed tone, "Congratulations, it seems that the good thing will be close to the end with our relationship. I'm sure to give you a big red packet." All the expressions on his face froze into ice. "Is that really what you think?" I deliberately ignored the despondency and sadness in his tone and laughed. "Of course, I'm sure when I get married you'll give me." The words were blocked between his lips before he could finish. An eager and dominating kiss. My hands subconsciously tried to wrap around his neck, but stopped halfway. He cupped my chin, forcing me to open my mouth, and his tongue invaded in a domineering and brutal manner, with a strong, missing and sour flavor. The tip of my nose was sore, and I was close to tears, but finally came back to my senses and pushed him away. I was going to make a joke that I could stop molesting my ex-boyfriend, but when I saw his red and sad eyes, I couldn't say it anymore. He wiped the water stain from the corner of my lips with his fingertips. "Mitchell, do you know how long it's been since we've seen each other?" I tilted my head in thought. 2 months? 46 days. He said, "Ah, that's a record. We've never gone this long without seeing each other. I think of all the 46 days we're going to go without seeing each other, Mitchell, and I think I'm going to go crazy." He held me so hard as if he wanted to rub me into his bones. "Do you think it would be better to just die?" I stared desperately, not wanting the tears to fall. This kind of Vincent was unfamiliar. He was always calm and self-possessed and strong, with a calm demeanor. Why now it was as if he was going to break at the slightest touch. I couldn't help but sigh. It turns out that what we thought would be fine if we didn't see each other was all a lie. On the car ride home, Mom and Dad were talking about Wesley and Vincent. Mother said, "It looks like Wesley's family and Vincent's family are close." My father said, Not necessarily, S-class omega is not too rare. In fact, there are many better than Wesley's family. Vincent is an S-class alpha, a rare one. Vincent's family will probably still be picking them out. My mother sniffed and looked at me, a look of pride in her eyes. After all, an S-class alpha, in this world where pheromone ratings are the most important, has a unique ability. Tough and superior, only such a person deserves to receive most of the resources. Only those who deserve to stand at the top of the pyramid, only those who can keep a family and be prominent forever. She looked at me for a moment, then suddenly asked me, "Where are you sick? Why have you been sickly today?" "If I don't get married." Before I could say the latter words, my mother had already changed her face and subconsciously looked at my father. Father also sank his face. "What nonsense! If you don't get married, will you let your illegitimate son inherit the family in the future?" "No, I'm not having a child either." The atmosphere in the car seemed to freeze, and the driver was in a cold sweat of fear. I smelled a hint of pheromone mania. It came from the father. "Mitchell, you're not a child now, you should know your responsibilities. And what if I give birth to a child that isn't S-rated either? Then keep having them, 10 or 20 of them, until you have them, and you won't have a shortage of omegas willing to give them to you. But what if I don't love them? Love is the least important thing." I let out a and closed my eyes. My mind was in a daze. Was responsibility, to keep a family prominent and passed on forever, really more important than Vincent? A voice objected over and over, and again I crushed it down roughly. Love was clearly the most important thing. For Vincent and Wesley's rumors begin to fly. I can tell it's all Wesley's family's doing, hoping to bring them closer together through public opinion and the media. Better to nail it down right away. But when I saw the picture of Vincent with his pockets stuck in his pockets, looking a bit indifferent, and Wesley standing next to him smiling gently and sunny, I couldn't help but feel bad. Still cannot restrain hard. I muffled my glass of wine in one gulp when Russell reached out and hooked his arm around my shoulder. A pair of peach blossom eyes that were not flowing were flashing with a wise light. People like us, when we were born rich and famous, and we didn't lack anything. But in life, there are gains and losses. After getting so much, you have to exchange it for something. For example, love. That's why it's meant to be. Don't get too caught up in love. I turned my head to look at him, and the moment I looked at him I understood. "When did you know?" "I've known for a long time, and you two are just hiding it from Evan's unenlightened boy." I sighed, my head spinning a little slow from the alcohol. "So, maybe he thought I was being too dull, he tugged at me about something else. I just don't know what else Wesley's family is up to in such a hurry that they haven't pulled any punches yet." But soon Russell's questions were answered. Vincent's aunt at home called me. I hesitated, but answered it, and a frightened voice snapped over the line, "Mitchell, you need to come over here." Her voice was so agitated that I subconsciously had gotten up and grabbed my clothes. "What's wrong with Vincent?" "Young master doesn't know what's going on. His susceptibility period has advanced." I realized why she was so scared. S-class alphas would be very aggressive if they couldn't control their pheromones during the susceptibility period. As the topmost pheromone creature, nothing can fight against it. So we usually have safe houses ready where we can spend our susceptibility periods. And the ones who have their own omega will spend time with their omega, who can soothe the alpha in the susceptible phase for a watery, rather blissful and crazy 7 days. Vincent had suddenly entered the susceptible phase at home. No wonder Lee's mom was scared. "I'll be right there," she continued. "Wesley just went in, but..." My forward steps suddenly stopped. My heart felt like it had been hammered violently by a boulder, and all my strength instantly dissipated. Wesley had gone and he was able to release pheromones to calm Vincent. A susceptible alpha is almost like a primitive beast dominated by desire. Maybe he'll even get Vincent's mark. The mark that symbolizes love and loyalty, possession and exclusivity. Even if it was temporary, it would be a priceless treasure for all to behold. It's all logical. An alpha needs an omega. So what's left for me? I let out a bitter laugh. It should be enough for me if he goes. It was as if a knife had been stabbed in my heart and kept churning. Finally, the day had come. "No way, Mitchell," shouted Lee's mom. "I don't know what happened when he went in there." He started screaming and shouting for help. "There's the sound of something breaking inside. We're afraid to go near it. Please come and take a look." I frowned, but went to the underground garage to get the car. There is a situation where the alpha won't accept the pheromone pacification of this omega. Then he'll keep attacking, killing, and maiming the omega. After all, the two are not on the same scale of power. I rushed to Vincent's house. The nanny and housekeeper were all watching outside the villa with anxious faces. Seeing me come over, they hurriedly urged me to go in. I walked into the villa and the pheromones of rosewood floated into my nose. With a strong aggressiveness and riotous lust in the constant invasion. If it was just an A-level alpha coming in, it should have brought him to his knees on the spot as well. I endured the discomfort and walked into Vincent's room. Inside, glass shards and various furnishings were shattered all over the place. Vincent was lying on the carpet in a very unstable state, frowning and trembling slightly. His long fingers were gripping the carpet, his veins bulging and knuckles white. And Wesley was huddled behind the door, already incapacitated. There was a puddle of vomit around him, muddy with the blood that had trickled down his injured arm. He appeared to be conscious, his pretty face filled with fear, and the room was filled with the smell of Wesley's orchid's pheromones intertwined with Vincent's rosewood's pheromones. The S-rated omega pheromones were quite seductive as well, and I was even feeling a little hot. I ripped off my tie and picked up Wesley as soon as I could. I had to get him somewhere safe from pheromone attacks first. I had just picked him up and turned to leave when I felt someone grab my ankle. Vincent's raspy, unpleasant voice rang out as he lay looking at me, his forehead hair damp with sweat. "Mitchell, don't go, don't go." I gritted my teeth, feeling like I couldn't hold back much longer. "Just let go of me and I'll get him out of here." "Don't go." The pheromones rioted even more, attacking me indiscriminately. The hands gripping my ankles were like iron jaws. "I'll be right back." "No, don't go. I'm begging you. I'm begging you." So vulnerable and pathetic. I gritted my teeth and kicked him away as hard as I could, and the moment I turned to exit the room, I saw his scarlet, unbroken eyes. Stubbornly looking at me as if I'd been abandoned by the world, pain and sadness crept into them. "Mitchell!" Vincent's overwhelmed shout came from the room. A shudder ran through me. Not caring that I was also suffering from a pheromone attack, I grabbed Wesley and ran downstairs. Wesley was in my arms, her long eyelashes blinking. Looking at me silently, the scent of orchids still fragrant, I frowned. "Take it in." He pursed his lips and suddenly smiled. "Are you reacting? Can I not with all the pheromones you're releasing? I actually like you better, but my family says you're harder to approach." I looked at him in shock, still in the mood to flirt with me at a time like this? Looking at him again, his face was also pale. Being mentally attacked by pheromones was quite a bad feeling. "Did you come here specifically to save me?" I didn't have time to bullshit him, and he looked like he was going to pass out or not. I carried him to safety and handed him over to my aunt, telling her, "Call Russell, he'll make the arrangements, and remember, keep today's events a secret." She nodded hurriedly. I got up and realized that Wesley was still clutching a piece of my coat. He was about to rip it out when he let himself go and passed out. I hurried back into the room, and just as I entered, Vincent jerked his head up. Ecstasy and aggravation and sadness flooded in together in the chaos of consciousness. I released my pheromones and the scent of incense quickly blended with the sandalwood. Alpha's pheromones have little pacifying effect on alpha. At best, they are not mutually exclusive. Vincent smelled the scent and suddenly reached out and pulled me to the carpet in one swift motion. His skin rolled frighteningly hot. Before I could even open my mouth to speak, a flood of kisses had fallen. Urgent, passionate, and rough as hell. The ardor in my body began to surge toward my lower abdomen. Vincent hooked his tongue around mine, kissing, drawing, sucking without discipline. Hands were already eagerly tugging at my shirt. He seemed to come to his senses and then he didn't, calling me in a voice tinged with lust, "Mitchell." I was inexplicably a little sad. It's me. Give it to me." He nibbled on my neck, poised. Two people who knew each other's bodies incredibly well, easily finding the most extreme pleasure from each other. He reached down and grabbed my ankle, leaving a ring of bruises. The air was thick with the smell of lust. Drunkenness was in the air and water was in the air. I don't know how I spent those 7 days. When I came to my senses, I was mentally grateful. Luckily, I am an alpha, my physical condition is beyond normal. Otherwise, I would have died in bed. I got up and stood in front of the bathroom mirror and realized that there wasn't much left of me. Teeth marks, hickeys, bruises, all signaling the insanity of the last 7 days. I froze and Vincent pushed his way in. We looked at each other and he wrapped his arms around me from behind. Is it hard? It's hard to explode, it's okay. The tip of his nose brushed against my neck, sniffing gently. I didn't think you'd come. Not to come and watch you get someone killed? He dropped his eyes and tightened his arms harder around me. After a moment, I pushed him. Let go, I have to go. Do you think we really made the right choice? He asked suddenly. I looked up at him in the mirror and saw the same question as my own. I used to think that we would be together forever. I didn't even think about what the future would be like without you. But now that I'm suddenly going to be separated from you because of some family duty, Mitchell, I'd rather be just a regular Omega. Why is it that we're always so on the same page? I forced a smile. You're an Omega, so you let me fuck you? As long as it's us together. I struggled. I have to go. I can't leave if I don't. I really want to. I want to stay too much. He let go, a flash of pain in his eyes. He said, Mitchell, can we let go of each other? I don't know. But a voice in the back of his mind screamed that it couldn't be done. The other person had already been sewn into his soul, becoming an inseparable part of it, and every fragment of his memory had a shadow of the other person in it. Unless they are skinned and boned, they will never be forgotten. 6. Because I was subjected to so many pheromones that day, my susceptibility period was advanced. It's just that I wasn't as sudden as Vincent. As soon as I sensed that the susceptibility period was coming, I asked the babysitter to pack up my things. I headed to the safe house alone. After the nanny packed up, she looked at a suitcase by my feet. Asked me, Young master, what is this? I said, nothing. Carried that separate suitcase downstairs by myself. Susceptibility period is really hard to endure, especially when there is no Omega to appease it. Destructive and erotic, I felt the pheromones in my body explode uncontrollably. I panicked and opened that suitcase, pulling out clothes that smelled of Vincent. A wave of them moved onto the bed, allowing his clothes to surround me and drown me completely. Maximum relief from the agitation in my heart. The smell of rosewood was so thick and bitter. I tightened my arms hard only to hug a thin piece of fabric. At that moment I was a little lost in thought, always feeling aggrieved, very aggrieved. Obviously it should have been hot Vincent I was hugging. I cursed him for being an asshole, sleeping my old man off during his own susceptible period, and now leaving me to simmer here all by myself. I felt pretty unreasonable about myself after all that scolding. It's not like he knows I'm susceptible. I hugged my clothes and looked at the ceiling. Suddenly cried out, Vincent, it's so hard, I kind of miss you, do you know? This is one of the most painful susceptible period in my life. 7. But the pain didn't end there. Because after the susceptible period, I received the wedding news of Vincent and Wesley. They were getting engaged. My cleaning lady came in and saw my messy, debris-covered office. The messy, smashed china and computers were a sign of the anger I had just felt. I sat down somewhat wearily in my boss chair. The blood on my arm dripped down my fingers and melted into the dark carpet. The cleaning lady called out to me cautiously, Mitchell, don't say anything. She hurriedly lowered her head and began to clean up the office. Near the end of the day, another person pushed through the door. I could smell the pheromones of orchids. Wesley walked up to me, her pretty brow furrowed. Your hand? What's wrong with you? Came to thank you for saving me last time. I hummed and continued to look out the window in disbelief. You're wondering why Vincent is suddenly susceptible, right? It was my parents. They wanted me to get Vincent's mark while he was susceptible. I inclined my head to look at him. He let out a bitter laugh and paled a little, but as you can see, he rejects me. I always knew I was just a bonding tool, but I really felt so cheap in that moment. But even so, I still have no choice. I have no choice to be marked by anyone, to marry anyone. Actually, I like you more than him. These words were not new to me, he had said them once before. I wasn't in the mood to comfort him, because he wasn't the only one who didn't have a choice. The noblest of genes is also the strongest of cages. Their engagement went ahead as planned. The media surrounded the villa with their long guns and short cannons. The political and business celebrities who came to the engagement party, whichever one of them they photographed, would be enough to be on the news page. The halo of light from the huge crystal lamps was like a layer of gold leaf, enveloping this real sense of fame and fortune. Vincent hadn't come yet. Wesley was surrounded by the crowd in his white couture suit. He had always been very good at socializing, but today he was a little distracted. His father gave him a disgruntled look and he immediately put on a perfect smile. Everyone maintained very decent social etiquette and pheromone stickers were placed on the back of everyone's neck. In a place like this where alpha and omega were in abundance, pheromone confusion could easily cause a ruckus. So everyone pays quite a bit of attention. I was looking toward the door for Vincent's figure when suddenly a hint of orchid scent drilled into my nostrils. I subconsciously looked over at Wesley. There was only a sound of a wine glass breaking and the scent of orchids became even more fragrant, mixed with hints of lust and seduction. I felt the blood flow in my body rapidly accelerate. A thin red rose on Wesley's pale skin and he half curled up uncomfortably. He was in heat. On an occasion like this, if it clashed with an omega's heat, everyone would have taken their inhibitors ahead of time. There was absolutely no way this could go wrong. Wesley's voice became more seductive. There's something wrong with the wine. The scene became tumultuous. The pheromone of an S-class omega in heat is definitely the most powerful pheromone in the world. The last time his pheromones were mixed with Vincent's, I was barely able to resist. Ordinary alpha can't resist at all. I locked eyes with Russell in the distance. He nodded at me. I rushed over while still conscious and picked up Wesley in a hug, immediately leaving the scene and going to my room on the second floor. With all the media watching outside the villa, there was absolutely no way any scandal could happen in the villa. I threw him onto the bed. The orchid scent was still drilling into my nostrils, making my entire brain incredibly chaotic. It agitated me to the point where my eyes were already bloodshot. Wesley was so hard he kept writhing on the bed, reaching for my arm. "Mitchell," came the sweet, soft, seductive call. I get fired up and backhand him. "Is this your way of rebelling against Wesley's family?" He smiles at me, his forehead hair moistened with sweat. "Yeah, you want me to stop? You know there's only one way. Marker. You know what a mess it is out there right now?" He nodded, so hard that he kept rubbing his lower body against me. "But I'm just drinking a drugged-up glass of wine. I'm not to blame." "You." He interrupted me suddenly. "You're hard. Tag me, you tag me and my engagement to Vincent will be cancelled. You'll have to answer to me. If you don't tag me, just watch tonight get messy." My canines were already starting to itch, the slightly red glands and the ever-writhing body reflected in my eyes. It was incredibly seductive. "Can't I call another alpha to tag you?" In plain sight, I'm Vincent's soon-to-be rightful fiancé being marked by a common alpha, then I can stop living. The agitation downstairs grew louder. A group of men were crouching outside the villa. Russell wouldn't be able to evacuate that fast. Wesley's pheromone levels were greatly increased when she was in heat. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I pressed down on the writhing man, who was already in such a state of erotic torment that his pupils were beginning to lax. Wesley let out a yelp of pain. It was followed by a moan of uncertain meaning. The two strands of pheromones merged, sweet orchid mixed with the scent of incense, and all was suddenly calm. I tasted blood in my mouth. Before I could return to my senses, he reached down to unbuckle my belt. A demanding kiss about to fall was dodged by me, inclining my head. I took 2 deep breaths as Russell pushed the door open and ran in. "You're crazy." Anyone who knew what was going on, The smell of two pheromones intertwined meant mark. I was just temporary marking. Before I finished my sentence, I was suddenly silenced as I saw Vincent's scarlet eyes in the doorway of the room. With a monstrous rage, with a madness that would destroy everything. He stormed in and yanked me by the collar, his voice like sobbing blood. "Mitchell! How dare you tag him? How dare you tag someone else?" I stared at him in disbelief, my heart on fire. Fuck, he's got the nerve to question me. I'm not the one who's getting engaged today. I punched him in the face. If I don't tag him, am I going to watch your engagement party turn into a scene of promiscuity? Groom, don't you have to thank me? He took 2 steps back and looked at the blood stain on the corner of my lip that was left from biting through a gland earlier. Vincent suddenly got violent. We hadn't fought so freely. Both sides were equal in strength and showed no mercy. Jealousy and anger crept into his eyes, and for the first time, Vincent, who was always calm and steady, looked like an animal that had lost its mind. We fought from the room to the hallway, and on the second-floor stairway I kicked him and he grabbed my ankle before rolling down. As we rolled down the hall together, all I could feel was a fiery pain in my back before I could react. He reached down and grabbed me again. The air became incredibly thin as we both tumbled to the ground in a chokehold. Suddenly I felt pretty good. I didn't have to watch him have a good time with someone else. Just choke each other to death. He sat on his knees on top of me, his hands didn't let go, and there were tears falling on my face. In the stalemate, some elders advised us. You two have to talk to each other, grew up together as brothers. Today's matter shall and is also expedient, not to intentionally do anything to your fiancé. Vincent. Vincent's dad's voice rang out with authority. His face was also quite bad. Wesley's family's parents even had no blood on their faces anymore, and Wesley's dad looked at Vincent's dad and said, "Calm down first, let's just cancel today's engagement. The engagement party is canceled, my Vincent's family does not want this cuckold." It seems to be really pissed off, Vincent's dad never speaks so harshly. Cuckold, I laughed mockingly, who was being cuckolded anyway. The man I slept with for a few years is getting engaged, clearly I'm the one being cuckolded. Vincent looked at me, only each other left in our eyes. Desperate, crazy, mixed with great pain and collapse. Vincent suddenly opened his mouth. "Mitchell, if the world was going to end next, what would you do now?" "I'd kiss you." Vincent let go and slowly leaned down, dropping a soft, as if a butterfly had lingered for a moment, kiss on my lips. We're always so on the same page. The scene was suddenly silent. He stood up and held out his hand toward me, and we clasped our fingers together once again. The crowd surrounded us like a tidal wave. I heard Russell and Evan say something out loud about my grass. I saw the disbelieving, shocked and gossipy eyes of the crowd. And finally my father's anger and my mother's tears. It was the end of the world. But with Vincent by my side, it didn't seem so scary. 9. I was kept by my mother and father in a special place for Alpha. I can't be kept in a normal place. Even my father, who really wanted to suppress me with pheromones now, could not succeed. There was nothing in the room except for 4 walls made of 40 centimeters of steel and a special door. My mother had come to me in tears and advised me, "Give in to your father, you and Vincent, how did you manage to get together?" I refused. "We'll just compete to see who lasts longer." Then they started backing off. "What about you two? Your father said he didn't care, but you have to have heirs in the future. Mitchell, you haven't let mom worry about you since you were a kid, say yes, just so you can have a child." The claustrophobic space had started to break me down a little. I bumped my head against the wall that I had already damaged and dented. "No, I'll only have Vincent." I heard my father's voice, grunting coldly, "That Vincent kid can figure it out, why can't you?" I opened my eyes at the sound of Vincent's name, my eyes clearing. "No, he won't say yes either, you're swindling me." Father was silent as well. I looked at the faint light from the doorway and thought, soon, they can't keep me locked up for the rest of my life. I'm only going to rebel this once, I'm going to win. But I didn't expect them to release me any sooner than I thought. The light that suddenly came in through the open door stung my eyes as I squinted. My father's always serious face was filled with hateful anger. He slapped me hard across the face. "Look at the trouble you've caused." I was blinded in place, and before I could look back, I saw the bodyguards behind my father, men from Vincent's family. I cringed, thinking of only one possibility: something had happened to Vincent. He was locked up by his family just like me. Vincent's dad had always been a harsher presence than my parents, and I don't think he'd ever say things like family responsibility without a fight. Vincent secretly stabbed himself in the gland with a sharpened chopstick. The gland is the source of all the power of an S-rank alpha, and if it is damaged, the S-rank alpha's unique ability will be lost forever. From being the pride of heaven to an ordinary person. This was a bolt from the blue for a strong alpha. He said, if he wasn't an S-class alpha, he could be with you. Vincent's father said to me outside the operating room. He refused to go into the operating room until you came after he was so badly injured. I kept my head down, feeling guilty and uneasy, both for Vincent's family parents and my own. Your parents and I have watched you two grow up together, how much effort your parents have put into you, the whole family is honored by you, and you really don't have half a care in the world? The words came like a mountain. Such words made me fearful and panicked. I looked towards the words, in surgery. Vincent was lying in there, having given up everything to ask for a future that was ours. I lifted my head and looked to Vincent's dad. I promise that in our lifetime we will give everything to our family, we will make our family prominent and honorable, but we can't leave each other, we can't give up on each other right now for something that will happen 100 years from now. Vincent's dad sighed and my parents looked at me, also quite puzzled. I suddenly felt a little sad, or, other than a tool to continue the glory, have aunts and uncles, mom and dad, ever loved us just simply as sons? Just your children, the kind of children you would love even if they weren't S-alpha, even if they weren't smart or strong. We can't repay your kindness in the way you want us to. If that makes us unworthy of being your children, then I can give you back everything you've given me. The genes you gave me, including my life. Just like Vincent, give it all back. The three people across the room froze. Tears fell violently from my mother's eyes, and even my father, who was always cold and hard and serious, had a moment of silence. My mother jumped up and slapped me and hugged me again. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? Vincent's father sighed and his gaze went back to the operating room. The lights went out. He snapped over to me, and for the first time, the man who wouldn't hesitate for a moment with $1 billion contract in front of him, who hadn't changed his face even in the face of monstrous waves, wolves, tigers, and leopards, looked flustered. How's my son? The surgery was a success, but the final extent of the gland's recovery will depend on the patient's recovery from subsequent treatments. His form shifted before his breath slowly dropped. I pursed my lips and looked toward the operating room, knowing that we had won. With extreme and crazy tactics like Vincent's. I was awakened by Vincent's touch. His bony hands ran over my cheeks and nose and lips. I raised my eyes to see him smiling at me and wanted to curse him, but my eyes got wet first. You crazy bastard. You've been kicked in the head by a donkey, haven't you? You. He grabbed my fingertips and kissed them gently, looking at me without blinking. How much should you be hurting? The glands have such sensitive and developed nerves, how much should it hurt to poke them in? He thought for a moment. It didn't really hurt very much, not as much as the moment I saw you, Mark Wesley. He pulled me into the hospital bed, a bed big enough for us to sleep together in the VIP ward. We finally cuddled together again in an intimate position, both hearts beating at the same frequency. I'm sorry I made this decision so late. I was really going crazy the moment I saw you tagged Wesley. You were in so much pain when you found out I was getting engaged, weren't you? I played with the ring on his hand in silence, a cheap, plain ring like that shouldn't be something we would have. But I remember very well when we were young and we were walking down the street and someone was proposing to us, and we gathered around and said, marry him, and then the party broke up and Vincenzo said, marry him, marry him. As the crowd dispersed, Vincent snapped his head up and locked eyes with me, and we instantly understood what the other was thinking. Marry me. In unison. I snorted out a laugh. Where's the ring? It was 9:50 and the malls were closing, but the passion of that moment seemed to never wait for tomorrow. We ran down the street hand in hand, into a small store that hadn't closed yet. We picked out a pair of rings that we could both wear. It was the simplest and most unassuming engagement ceremony we've ever had. I said, "I'm going to marry you later, and you're going to give me lots and lots of children." He looked at me and smiled, his cheeks a little red. "Maybe I'll marry you and you'll give me children. But it's always the two of us together, right?" "Yes, we'll always be together." I laughed out loud at the thought. Vincent looked at my face and suddenly reached down and untied the necklace around my neck that had the same ring strung on it. He put it on my hand for me. Clasping his hands together with his fingers, he said, "Now you can wear it with honor." I couldn't help but smile as I looked up at him, my eyebrows, the tip of my nose, my lips. Then the gaze glued itself to those pale-colored, perfectly shaped lips. I don't know who made the first move, but by the time I reacted, I was already pinned beneath him, my lips and tongue entwined, and he attacked nonchalantly, with full possession and lust. The hand with the ring touched my chest and belly, all the way down. My legs hooked around his strong, lean waist. Lust burned my mouth dry, his lips and tongue lighting fires in me with ease. I couldn't help but reach into his hair, silently asking him for more. His kisses land in the small of his back and stop going down, looking up at me. "Call me Vincent." "No more if you don't call me right." "Honey." I looked to the door of the hospital room between the drunken entanglements and thought to myself that I had made the right decision in locking the door just now. 11. Vincent's glandular follow-up recovery was excellent. I was driving when I was discharged from the hospital when suddenly Evan's phone call came in. I hung up as quickly as I could. "Why don't you answer it?" "Don't you dare answer it. After hiding it from him for so long, he's calling now looking for trouble." As we were talking, Evan's phone called again. Vincent smiled. "If you can hide the first day of the year, you can still hide the 15th day of the year." He reached out and answered it. And Evan's voice came through on the other side. "Yo, you're answering the phone now?" "It's me." "We're together." Okay. I'll apologize to you some other time. I shouldn't have kept it from you." He grunted. "Some other time, today. Same place." When we got there, Russell was there, looking at us with his arms wrapped around him, gloating and laughing. We coaxed and apologized to Evan. He looked a little better and gave me a push. 20 years of brotherhood, but now you're in a clandestine relationship." I rubbed my nose. I'm too embarrassed to say anything. Besides, I glanced at Russell, who was watching the show. Russell already knew, and he didn't tell you. Evan looked over at Russell with a raised eyebrow. No. Vincent and I looked at each other and smiled. After a few quiet moments, Evan suddenly kicked Vincent. "Remember to pay me back for my share of the money." "I'm sure you will. I'm not the one who didn't charge you for Mitchell and I's wedding." Russell drained his glass. "What about your parents?" "Barely. Just don't go back and piss them off for a couple years while they digest the situation." He nodded. "You two should do the same." He nodded. "You two are really something. Everyone in the world now says you're in love." "I don't have the guts anyway." I pursed my lips and quietly tightened my grip on Vincent's hand. When I came out after the event, I suddenly realized that it was snowing. The first snowfall of the year. I saw it with Vincent again. It's been more than 20 winters, and I never get tired of it. He looked at me and suddenly asked, "How much did you give me as a gift? Didn't you say you would give me a big red envelope for my wedding?" I thought about it and smiled. "For $60,000. He came up and pulled me into his arms. 46 days is a record that should never be broken, okay?" I touched my lips to his cold face. "It's up to you, isn't it? It's up to you, in case Vincent suddenly wants to get married again or something." He reached out and twisted my waist, tickling me so much that I flinched. "Are you still going to say that?" I laughed so hard that I denied it. No more, really no more." The snow got heavier after all the fuss, and poured on our heads, looking like gray hairs before it melted. I suddenly reached out and touched his eyebrows, so gentle, so beautiful. Suddenly, I remembered a line from a poetic poem. If we were to share the snow in the morning, we could share our heads in this life. But he kissed me and corrected me, it's not that we'll be together, but that we'll be together until the end of our days. I smiled and kissed him back. Yes, together until we grow old. I won't let go of his hand again.